How's it going, Bat Family? Welcome to another The Batman video. Today we have a very brief update with a nice new shiny synopsis, which gives us a little bit more detail, of which, you know me, I can kind of get into that quite a little bit with my brain and how I just can talk about it for a bit too long maybe. But then, of course, we're going to get into another installment in the discussion series. So I've got my Starbucks coffee, not a product placement, just me ordering coffee in the morning. And hey, let's get right into the synopsis. And yes, I would love your thoughts as always, guys, down in the comments below with what I'm about to read out. It's similar to what we've read out before, but it's expanded, and it just gives us little clues because, as we all know here, we get into every facet and corner whenever it comes to anything new for the Batman. And this actually does kind of come into some of the questions we're tackling today. By the way, if you have missed out on my previous The Batman video, which was a discussion series video as well as a news update, I do recommend checking it out because we get into even more Barry Keoghan Joker update stuff. And sorry if I'm butchering Keoghan. Is it Keoghan? Like Monahan, Cameron Monahan, I don't know. Watch it if you haven't seen it. So it starts off with the whole, it's not just a call, it's a warning. And then, from Warner Brothers Pictures come Matt Reeves' The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson in the dual role of Gotham City's vigilante detective and his alter ego, reclusive billionaire Bruce Wayne. Okay, I'll stop. 2 years of stalking the streets as Batman, Robert Pattinson, striking fear into the heart of criminals, has led Bruce Wayne deep into the shadows of Gotham City. Now, I do want to continue there, but it's just interesting that they stay just 2 years, as in 24 months, because Matt Reeves, at the first DC fandom event, if you want to get a little bit kind of over-specific about it, he did say, oh, have you no official synopsis, 1 year, 6 months, or was it 1 year, 8 months? I think it was 1 year, 6 months. Memory with things I'm very passionate about is usually very good. But anyway, 2 years of stalking the streets as the Batman, striking fear into the hearts of criminals, has led Bruce Wayne deep into the shadows of Gotham City, with only a few trusted allies, Alfred, Pennyworth, Lieutenant James Gordon, among the city's corrupt network of officials and high-profile figures. The lone vigilante has established himself as the sole embodiment of vengeance amongst his fellow citizens. And I just love that description already, and it does continue. I know I'm interjecting here, but it's just setting up what Matt Reeves says. This isn't an origin story, yet it refers to his origin. So he's already been combing the streets, like Batman Year One. You know, when you're flicking through the panel, you get that kind of monologue from Bruce as he's in his drifter mode, Matches Malone mode, walking through the streets. He's been doing that for a good couple of years, or 1 year, 6 months. Now, this is where things get a little bit more spicy. So when a killer targets Gotham's elite with a series of sadistic machinations, a trail of cryptic clues sends the world's greatest detective on an investigation into the underworld. And this is going back to the rumors of what we heard, like, ages ago, like well before we heard anything from the first DC fandom event. We knew that his investigation would lead him into the criminal underworld, where he encounters such characters as Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman, who works at Oz's little club, the very proto Iceberg Lounge, if you will, of which we've seen in the trailers. Oz Cobblepot, aka the Penguin, Carmine Falcone, or Falcone, whatever way you bloody prefer it, and Edward Nashton, aka the Riddler. And for all of you who were like, it's not Nashton, there you go. It is Nashton. It might turn out to be Nigma eventually. Who knows? But as the evidence begins, now this is what intrigues me. As the evidence begins to lead closer to home. You're a part of this too. How am I a part of this? Sins of my father. I'm getting all kinds of little flashbacks right now. Leads closer to home, and the scale of the perpetrator's plans becomes clear. Batman must forge new relationships, unmask the culprit, and bring justice to the abuse of power and corruption that has long plagued Gotham City. Now, obviously, we've all been wondering about that very line at the end of the first DC fandom trailer. Obviously, I'm not putting a lot of stock into that line being a part of that very scene where Bruce takes his cowl off and he looks up. It's probably a line cut and added to that scene. You get what I'm trying to say there, but at some point along the way, it could even be where Bruce visits Riddler in Arkham Asylum, akin to what we've seen in the most recent trailer, where it's like, I've been trying to reach you. It could be added in that conversation where he says, you're a part of of this too. Maybe Bruce calms down a little bit from where he says, "What have you done?" He kind of gets to a point of where Riddler says, "You're a part of this too," and he's like, "How am I part of this?" And he's like, "You'll see." That could be wrong as well. It could be a line from any part of the movie, but when the freaking actual official updated synopsis leans into the fact that as the evidence begins to lead closer to home, as Matt Reeves said, how does this tie back to my family? That's an abbreviation of what he said, but it's practically more or less spot on, so take my word for that. This relates to Bruce. In the trailer, there is "the sins of my father?" ? So clearly, whether you like it or not, and as I said, I'm not trying to sound mega confident with this because I don't know for sure. Somehow, I think, whether the Waynes did so much good for Gotham or not, like they could have done so much good, it might be what I've repeatedly said before in my videos, where even if you do such good things, help forge new buildings and construction for Gotham, or like, you know, what they did in the Nolan series, the railway system or whatever, you may have still had a little toe or two dipped in the paddling pool of corruption. You might not be able to help it. Gotham's a stink hole of corruption. Even if you're one of the good eggs, one of the good elite, you might still have a crack or two in your shell. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, otherwise, they won't accept you in a way. Like, they'll yeet you out of Gotham. So Thomas or Martha Wayne may have been that way. Or maybe it was just one of them. Martha turned a blind eye to it and Thomas handled it. Maybe it's the other way around. But I do have a bit of a theory with regards to that 3/4 of the way throughout the film, that people who have been to test screenings or whatever, it's just coming out in the woodwork through the grapevine. There's a big surprise. Now, this isn't referring to the rumored Joker scene at the very end. That is only meant to be an extremely quick teaser for like more world building, attributing stuff to the movie and the franchise. The actual 3/4 of the way movie big bombshell that has everyone shocked. What could that be? Now, I have a feeling, and I have very mixed feelings about it, about my theory. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't even, as I kind of said before, put a lot of stock into this, but I'm a bit apprehensive about it, and I'm just taking into account some of the clues. And the sins of my father point, and how you're a part of this too, could honestly pertain to what we've discussed before with how Riddler may know Batman's identity, and that is because of one thing, and this gets into a couple of the questions that we're about to get into from you guys, and I'll expand upon it there. But what if, through, as we know, Batman and Jim Gordon go to the Gotham orphanage? That was in the B-roll footage. You see a G and an O. And in some of the extra, I believe, Blu-ray footage, you see them basically investigating a place. It's very evident that that's a few scenes of them going throughout Gotham orphanage, and they're probably looking up the files. This leads them further and further to find out Edward Nashton's history. Like, my life has been one big cruel riddle, Batman. Like, that's from some of the promo artwork out there. So you get where I'm going with this. He's had a cruel life. So is Batman, so is Selina, but not everyone turns out to be sadistic like the Riddler and handling Gotham's corruption through murders. Batman's handling it in his own brutal way, arguably mentally ill, just like the Joker's very mentally ill, just like the Riddler's mentally ill. Now, hear me out here. Don't laugh. This is just a theory. As I said, I don't even take it that seriously, and it could be something, I could be like close to 3/4 of the trip, but not the resolution or the conclusion that I've come to with this unique theory. So what if the reason why, as the evidence begins to lead closer to home, you're a part of this too, how am I part of this? You'll see the similarities of Riddler and Batman growing up with a cruel life, obviously, Bruce losing his parents, Riddler probably being an orphanage, experiencing the worst of what Gotham has to offer as an orphan, but Bruce as an orphan as well, except he grew up in a privileged way with Alfred Pennyworth. You see what I'm trying to get to with the parallels of Batman and his villains that are usually painted in quite a few of the rogues gallery to Batman. There's always, you know, something you can get into there between Batman and that said individual, but Riddler here, there's so many parallels. And then how they're both basically on this conquest and mission to free the corruption of Gotham, except in two very different ways. Batman's trying to not kill and do it in a very brutal way, but a very standard, like, not murderous way. Riddler is doing that. Okay, I'm just gonna get to the chase. What if the big twist is that Thomas Wayne had an affair and had a child that was Edward Nashton, and he got brought up in the Gotham orphanage, and the first child between Thomas and Martha Wayne was Bruce? Now, it might not be an affair, I do want to get that out of the way, but the only reason I struggle to believe as to why it wouldn't be an affair is because if Thomas and Martha Wayne had a child between them both, I'm sure they would have brought him up with Bruce. However, if this kind of, as I said, if Bruce, in a lot of stories, puts his parents up on a pedestal. They're the very reason he starts what happens when they die in Crime Alley, whether he knows there was some degree of corruption in whatever iteration you're reading or not. The fact is, he experienced something traumatic that springboarded him into who he later becomes. Now, what if he learns that they're not as glorious, whether they were into... Well, at the end of the day, they're still his parents, so obviously he's not going to just stop being Batman because the thing happened, they died, that catapulted him into being Batman, but that still won't stop him from, like we saw in the B-roll footage, throwing and tearing shit down when he may find out that not only A, they could have been having a toe or two, as I like to say, in the paddling pool of corruption, but what if he finds out that he's actually related to Riddler? Now, I know this sounds so crazy. I know it does. And the thing is, I have mixed feelings about it because it's like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm sure just like many of you are feeling. However, I would see why they would want to do that because... For example, the Riddler would be very Riddler in this movie. It's a new take, yet very familiar to... He's literally the Riddler. He's doing Riddler things. There's new themes of inspiration, like Zodiac Killer design. But all in all, like, it wouldn't... I don't think it should be as alienating just because they add an innovation into the story where it turns out that, oh, technically Riddler being abandoned in the Gotham orphanage is the long-lost brother of Bruce Wayne. Now, I already know people could be like, Boba, for real, come on. I'm not saying this is happening. It's just, it occurred to me, and then I thought, like, oh man, I don't know if I like that, but I feel like I need to mention it to my subscribers, because what if this big, shocking, twisting thing, which isn't the post-credit scene or, like, the end thing, you know, imagine how tragic that is to Bruce, that he learns that he had a brother that for some reason or another, whether it was outside the marriage or whether Thomas Wayne did that when they were married, they recovered from it, but they didn't want the child, so they only wanted their own child that they had between each other. That happens. The other kid, unfortunately, goes off to Gotham Orphanage. Gotham is a shithole. He lives in a Gotham orphanage, which you could only imagine the barbaric experience that could be. And Riddler is shaped in a way that Bruce is also shaped like through Gotham, but in a much more tragic way, that he's turned out to be this person who's murdering people. Even though he is kind of taking out very corrupt people, it's not the way to handle it. And imagine like how bad Bruce would feel, how much anger he might feel at his father, if like his father was responsible for having an affair with someone, and like that could be the case. Like the baby just, you know, is left with the woman and Thomas just doesn't really care about the baby. But Riddler, through wanting to find more out about his roots through growing up and becoming the person he does, knows about Bruce Wayne. Maybe he's kept a long watchful eye on him. Maybe he's put two and two together that he is the Batman. But that would also answer the question of if you are a part of this too, like many have speculated for a long time, could mean that he does know the identity of the Batman. A lot of us have struggled with, well, why wouldn't he give that identity away? Yes, I know sometimes some villains do like to just keep that to themselves, and they prefer the theatricality relationship with the Batman and don't want to expose him. But that's a bit more of a hard sell in a real-esque movie that is as grounded as this, even though it is a bit fantastical. But getting back to the main point, it would kind of make you believe why Edward Nashton wouldn't just reveal his own brother's identity, thus making it a bit more of a connected into like personal story between both characters. That's more or less what I've got to say after just yet again reading in another thing as the evidence begins to lead closer to home. I don't want to repeat myself too much more, but every other clue I mentioned that we've seen so far, the fact that Bruce is trying to figure out the riddles, one of them does say sins of my father, you know, just things like that. All I'm saying is for you guys to really contemplate, would you be surprised that no matter how comic accurate Riddler is in this movie and how much we may love that they may have tried to do an innovative take for once where Riddler's actually related. Technically that wouldn't be alienating to do because it's like, why not? Like, I guess, you know, why that's never been done before. Like, why not actually have this tragic thing of where obviously they're technically blood related, but they've never grown up together. There's these parallels between both characters. I'm just worried about it. I don't know why. I think there's this inherent thing where we feel as Batman fans, maybe I'm just feeling this by myself and none of you are feeling this, but like, I don't know how I feel about Riddler being his brother, even if it's completely disconnected, they didn't grow up together. But there's a part of me that the more I think about it, I could see Reeves and the writers, should I say, maybe coming up with this idea, and it being this tragic revelation that, oh, look at how this man turned out. We're both actually similar in a way, trying to sort out this corruption, but look at what he's become. Look at what my father and mother did. Look at how that maybe the sins of my father are linked to the corruption, and look at how they disregarded him. And look how we both turned out to be kind of two sides of the same coin in a sense. One who murders and one who doesn't. I could see them going there. That would be a shocking twist for the general audience, for sure. Like, that would, you can't deny, that would make sense for the reaction that people had, apparently, at some point in the movie. But, guys, just want to put this out there. Hope some of you are still here to not think I'm totally crazy. It was just a crazy theory. I could be completely wrong about that. Just wanted to chuck it out there for you guys to maybe flesh it out a little bit in case I could be onto something. And by the way, even if he isn't related, I do believe all the aforementioned points when it comes to coming closer to home. You're a part of this too. Sins of my father could, at the end of the day, lead to the Waynes being up on the pedestal by Bruce, and that revelation at the end of the day, them having to do with something really bad in Gotham, and that could be a big shocking twist that disgusts Bruce. Either way, we're on the right path here, but I might have gone down a little alley that got me lost. Now, we've got a couple of long questions to start off with. Now, and some of them, as I said, pertain to what we were talking about, but I'll try not to repeat myself too much other than just kind of refer to what I said. So Retroactive23 says, question, and this is a very good question because I never realized it in my first trailer breakdown, but ever since you kind of see it, and slow-mo it, it's like, holy crap, and this could link to something else in the trailer. So, I've watched the trailer a million times like everyone else, and I've studied the frame where the big explosion happens. Yep, that one that just kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's like, yeah, what the hell is exploding? It looks like it's happening by the Iceberg Fish Company, and that is run by Oz, located by Gotham Harbor, and it looks like it's located underneath the bridge that is featured in the trailer and calendar art that has a keyhole design to it. We also get a view of it when Oz is looking out his window, presumably from his club, but it looks like one of the Riddler's plans is to blow up the harbor and dams in an attempt to flood the lower streets of Gotham. What do you think his motivation could be to flood the lower streets? Because it looks like there is a lower and upper part of Gotham, which would only increase the tension between the rich and the poor. What could his motivation be? Thanks, Boba. The Batman videos are the best on YouTube. Thank you. Cheers, thank you. And so I struggled. Like, I've thought about that as well, and I'm glad that I screenshotted the reply to this question in my little community tab bit because It's Bishop offered an answer there, and I thought it was an interesting one. The only thing before I get onto this reply, which has a cool idea, is that the only thing I could connect it to is that part in the trailer where Bruce is leading people out. It's evident that these people are following him, so he's clearly saving people as a result of what is likely to be this flooding. Now, you could be on the ball there with the lower and upper part of Gotham, and with what we're about to get into with Bishop's idea, it could make a lot of sense. So first and foremost, just off the top of my head, we know as a result, well, I don't know this for a fact, or arguably when Bruce is lighting up the flare and leading people out, that could be another part. But what are the chances that it looks like a place is flooded, he's leading a lot of people out, that is something else? No, it's probably as a result of this explosion that you're seeing on screen. You can see this explosion, right? But look at the far right. You see that little crumbling part and the water gushing through. So yes, I think what I love about that, and what a lot of people are starting to talk about who've also realized this as well, just in case you haven't, is that despite the vengeance and fear and myth and legend of the Batman in this movie, this is the seeds of the hope that the Batman brings. He's going to be, and if they're citizens, whether they're cops or whatever, they're going to be citizens of Gotham at the end of the day, and they're going to be led out by this Batman, this masked vigilante, and that is, I know most people will still fear him, but there's going to be those spreading the word throughout Gotham that this guy isn't just there to scare people, he's there to help people. But as I was saying, It's Bishop replies to the question I just read out, saying that would also work with the scene, okay, of what I just said, of Batman leading people through the flooded area. Maybe Riddler is doing Riddler punch shit and metaphorically washing the corruption away from Gotham. I really like that idea from Bishop. That's really good. It could be wrong, but that would be Riddler. Do you know what I mean? Like, literally, metaphorically, blowing something up and washing away, and as we're about to get onto with what Bishop says, it could be to take away the rich Gothamites' source of income from lower areas, or to force the lower class to live in the upper area. I'm not sure. Riddler doesn't seem too focused on relieving tensions between the classes and more focused on punishing and exposing the corrupt. So this is where this series comes into place. Like, you raise a good point. That could be off, and yeah, he might not seem so focused there on doing that, and he might just be, about exposing the corruption. So this one's such a hard thing to answer for me. despite that's the point of this series, like, I know those two scenes are very likely connected in the trailer, but as for actually what he's doing and why he's doing that, it's so hard to know, because what we know is he's been murdering Gotham elites, like, as it says in the synopsis, mayor, DA, so on and so forth. But blowing this part up, maybe there are larger games to his plan than just murdering. Maybe it is, like, taking out some infrastructure that F's with the Gotham's elites areas, like, so this might be run by an elite member. Either way, it could just alienate that area, as Bishop gets into, to kind of force maybe some of the scum that the elite view into their own territory. It's so hard to know. And I wish I could offer more on this. This is one of the few ones that stumped me in terms of ideas, which is why I'm glad that Bishop replied here with a couple of ideas, you know, whether that's washing away the corruption metaphorically, or if it's, you know, just something extra that he just simply has planned. But hey, this is what this is all about as well. Offer your thoughts to these first couple of questions down in the comments. Now, this is what I meant by linking back to my crazy ass theory at the beginning of this video, where DLXLLL, I guess, says, Zoe Kravitz mentions in a recent interview that Selina's searching for a missing friend of hers. And if you're wondering what interview that is, I've got it on the channel. I cover it. It's the Japanese interviews, the hidden DC fandom panel where Robert Pattinson, Reeves, and a couple of others, you know, obviously including Kravitz, talk about the Batman and give away, like, actually a few plot details. So check that out if you haven't already. It should be linked at the end of this video, perhaps. So anyway, and how the Batman has a hunch that her missing friend ties into the case. Kravitz goes on to say that this missing person case sparks an emotional, deep connection between her and Batman, or as Selena puts it, maybe we're not so different. This makes me think Bruce, Selena, and Edward could be cut from the same cloth, and as I said, this is what I was getting into earlier, as orphans who had to fend for themselves in an unforgiving Gotham. The big thing that I'm taking out of that, everyone's different. Bruce became Batman. Selena became Catwoman. She's more self-serving rather than Bruce dedicating his life for the city. Riddler, as an orphan, became something else, trying to serve the city through taking out the elite, I suppose, and stop the corruption, but does it in more of a villainous way. So that's why I'm getting into all of that bat-tingly senses stuff earlier. So while Bruce grew up coping with Gotham's deep-seated corruption from the shadows of Wayne Manor in a very privileged way, Selena and Edward were also forced to grapple with grief in their youth, but while facing, yes, this is exactly what I was saying earlier, yet while facing the brunt of this corruption head-on. Like maybe Edward's parents became addicted, so this is where I don't know, addicted to drops and abandoned him at a young age. That actually could be extremely relevant. If I'm completely wrong about the crazy ass theory, yeah, he could just honestly be, as I was saying with some of the other examples, just an orphan who got ditched there and was just simply one of the kids who experienced the bitterness of Gotham at its arguably worse, and that's why his life's been one big cruel riddle. These three clearly operate under radically different moral codes, but their conviction for justice and drive for vengeance could be much more aligned than we're led to believe. Let me know your thoughts. Love the content. Cheers, brother. Thank you for such an insightful comment, kind of leaning into everything we're getting into already. Yep, I concur with this one. I don't know what more I can say other than what I said earlier. With a couple of these, I might just kind of refer to what I said earlier. Whether, as I said, the crazy ass revelation and 3/4 in the movie where it's like, oh, and the audience were apparently like that. Whether that's Riddler actually being an orphan but is actually blood related to Bruce, whether it's just through Martha or just Thomas or just a simple orphan. At the end of the day, the biggest similarities are what we're pointing out here and what you're saying, that they clearly operate under a very similar experience as three orphans. But hey, as I say, not everything or the same thing affects individuals in the same way. They'll each achieve a different outcome despite similarities being apparent. Another idea, just to toss it out there, like maybe, you know, the fact of the matter is we know that Gotham Orphanage is like all kind of chained up or whatever. So like it could just be something kind of something that Bruce views as disgusting, you know, chuck the crazy ass orphan related to Bruce idea out the way. What if, similar thing to what I was saying earlier, Thomas and Martha Wayne being put up on a pedestal, as we know Bruce views his parents as like, oh, you know, my parents? What if he learns that, to his disgust, that they closed down the orphanage when they didn't need to, and that just put all those kids out onto the street of Gotham? That could be something that just he feels partially responsible for, his family, the Waynes, as a result of what kind of made Riddler who he is. Of course, he could have ended up that way anyway, just through a Gotham orphanage, because, you know, orphanages aren't always the most stellar experience for kids, especially in Gotham. So yeah, just, as I said, crazy theories aside, what if, if they're going down the... And I know, because there's always comments saying, what is it with the Waynes kind of having a bit of bad aspects to them recently in iterations? As I said, it could be multifaceted. They could still be very good people, but maybe they were forced to somewhat close it. I don't know. But in the eyes of Bruce in that moment, it'd be like, my father kind of was half responsible for birthing the Riddler, because Edward Nashton could have grown up maybe a little bit different if he didn't just shut that down or something like that. I don't know. But again, I'll leave this one to you guys. Now, I know we spoke about Seven a few times recently, but I just wanted to bring up Phobia Studios' latest question saying, do you think Batman will get someone killed like Seven-inspired ending? Yes, in a sense that I don't think he'll get them killed directly. I don't think he's gonna, snap someone's neck. What I think could happen is briefly what we discussed in the last video, and I would love everyone to expand upon this, because I do think it's the main outcome of this will teach Bruce that you can't win them all, and it will really wear you down. It'll wear your emotions down, because you're gonna have to choose sometimes in an impossible situation where you can't save everyone. Even people like Superman has to learn that lesson. Despite everything he can do, travel at super speed, fly, stop a bridge from falling and crumbling, he can't be in two places at once. Kind of like what Batman learned in the Nolan trilogy with not being able to save Rachel and Harvey at the same time. I think there could be a Seven-esque ending in the sense that what we discussed in last week's video, where Batman's going to have to be forced to choose between a lot of Gothamites, or whether that's Barry Keoghan, Stanley Merkel, or, screw that idea for a second, just an individual. And he has to choose between that and maybe a bunch of people. He's going to choose the bunch of people, but he's going to feel awful for letting that other person die in the riddle, for example. Not saying this is going to happen, but I do think that's an important lesson to teach Bruce, the trauma of that, because he can still do his job. He's still doing a lot, but it's just, you can't do everything. And I think that could be a Seven-esque thing, where there's a little bit of a twist, where it's like, oh god, oh no, wait, what? And then maybe he's deliberately led to believe that he's chosen something that he thought would happen, and then it's actually something else entirely, and in a way actually was a worse outcome than what he wanted. He can't always win. It's just, even again, let's say he's not saving anyone, let's just say there is something he activates that kills people, I don't know. You can't always win, and Batman's gonna have to come to terms with that at some point in his long-ass career ahead of him. Now, Soul asks, what do I think Batman's relationship with the GCPD will be by the end of the movie? Because it does look like Jim has to stop Batman from beating the Riddler, or whoever is under that mask. Lots of people are thinking Riddler could have just put a citizen in that, and that could be a shocking thing in of itself. Where he's going like that, could be Bruce. Some people are saying like he might have taken a lot of adrenaline, and that's the links to the Batman Venom story where he's just so like roided up in that moment because he had to, and he's beating the shit out of someone, and lo and behold, it's not actually Riddler. And that could be another lesson in of itself, because he takes off the mask, demasks Edward Nashton, and he's horrified. And that could be why Selina's horrified in the background. I know I'm getting into a tangent away from your question, but do you see where I'm going? That could be another thing. But as you were saying, because it looks like it stopped Batman from being the Riddler, and I'm sure that will make him question if it's a good idea to let him be Batman or not. I think the relationship will be fairly steady. But I don't know, because clearly they let him onto the crime scene, which is always something I reiterate as intriguing to me, because they're breaking the law themselves through letting the Batman, a vigilante, which by definition is a person who takes the law into their own hands, which is illegal, onto a scene of a crime. It's hilarious to me, in a way. FBI agents are there, and he's on the scene of the crime. So it's clearly, as per what the synopsis said, he's got allies in Lieutenant James Gordon already. He's been going around. The GCPD are familiar with him. But as you point out, Batman's going to be doing things that, we see the GCPD shooting at him. That is messy. Now, I think Lieutenant James Gordon, by the events of the end of the movie, will probably try and mop that up as to whatever the heck causes him, or those cops, should I say, to shoot at Bruce as he's grappling out the precinct. I'm pretty sure that's the case in the location, and that's where the cops are after him, and he's about to wingsuit glide off the building. What leads him to do that? Why are the cops shooting him? Will that be repaired? His reputation? Who knows? Who knows? It could be, and I think it will be, because I think we need throughout the movies, one thing fans have loved out of some of the things where we've seen, it's a very animated series, seeing Batman standing there with James Gordon looking through some files or something like that, and some other officers are there, but not too many people get to see that. I think there's always going to be an understanding with the latter of what he said, if Jim thinks it's a good idea to let him be Batman or not. It's kind of like sod that, like Jim should know that there's nothing he can do to stop this individual from being Batman, and he knows that. It's more about I think Jim, who's also not perfect himself, by the way, from what I've heard in this movie, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard anyway, and that's just inherent in his character. There are no good cops in Gotham, really. Even Jim has to reckon with problems himself. Despite being the best of the bunch, let me put it that way. He will probably feel like he needs to keep the Batman grounded as much as he can. He knows the Batman's doing good, but he knows the Batman also isn't perfect, which we're going to see in this movie. It's not like he could stop him anyway, and he, by the events of the movie, that when they come to a close, should be clear that Batman, if he didn't get involved, the city would be fucked, like, through what the Riddler's done. Do you see where I'm going? Like, they should recognize that, and they have to. But it is totally possible, as of when the GCPD start firing at Batman in the movie, like we've seen in the trailers, that weird relationship that allowed a lot of cops to see and let Batman onto the scene of where he's checking out the mayor's death in the first trailer, that could be ruined indefinitely for the next couple of movies, and that could set up the status quo of what is normally happening with Batman, where cops fire first and ask questions later. Whereas prior to this, with the first 2 years that we haven't really seen, he's actually, I guess, allowed on the scenes of crimes. But as I said, ladies and gentlemen, I have to keep this one fairly short, even though it's a long video anyway. I would have got into like another 4 questions if I had the time, but I will be doing one next week. So make sure you leave your questions down in the comment section of this video if you have something new to offer, of course. I still have quite a backlog, but I always try and take some new questions from the most recent videos as well. Thank you, as always, for making these videos successful. I love the discussion and discourse we have. Let me know your theories and thoughts on what I've discussed. I know some of them got into a bit of crazy territory, but anything is possible, and I'd love to know if you can expand or add anything more concrete onto what we just went into today. So other than that, like this video if you did enjoy it. I'd really appreciate that. Share this with your DC friends. Check out some of my other videos as well if you're a fan of Marvel. I've covered Hawkeye, and I'm sure there's other content that you enjoy on the channel. But everybody, just thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you, Bat family, in that next video. Goodbye.